Support for WUWM podcasts comes from University School of Milwaukee, fulfilling a values-based mission of developing learners, fostering leaders, and preparing citizens for pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. More information at usm.org/mission.
There are many ways to track bird migration. One of the newer methods being used in Wisconsin is called the Motus Wildlife Tracking System. It's an international research network that uses small radio transmitters to track bird movement. Jacob Wolf is the Motus coordinator at the Lake Michigan Bird Observatory. Since Wisconsin falls along a migration route called the Mississippi Flyway, he says more Motus stations are needed to adequately detect birds. Lake Effect's Excret Nunez speaks with Wolf for this month's Chirp Chat to learn how Motus works and what it tells us about bird behavior.
For people who aren't familiar with Motus, what is this tool, and does the word Motus mean anything?
The word Motus is derived from a Latin word meaning movement. Motus is basically a way that we can track migratory birds, not only migratory birds, but birds and other animals too. People are familiar with songbird banding and GPS transmitters, but this is a completely different way that we can track birds.
And so we're here just outside of Port Washington at one of Wisconsin's Motus towers. Can you describe what the tower looks like and how the radio telemetry system works?
Sure. So Motus stations typically have an array of antennas ranging from 3 to 5 antennas, and each antenna is directional, meaning it's only listening for tags in the direction that it's facing. So anytime a bird carrying a specific transmitter flies by the station or within range of the station will detect it and it'll log it, and then the Motus Wildlife Tracking System decodes that data, and then you're able to tell what bird actually flew by the station. A lot can influence how well a tag is detected. So if you're by an airport, for example, or a major highway, that can contribute a lot of noise to it and limit the detection range of the station. But I would say generally speaking, up to several miles is a good range that a tag can be detected within.
And so this is just one tower. Is it better to have one or a lot, or can you talk about like the number of towers?
Sure. It's best to have as many as possible. So we have about 24 in our network right now, and adding more to that. Even within the next couple weeks, we'll be adding a couple more. I say as many as possible because sometimes a bird could fly near a station and not get detected for whatever reason. But we're also considering it's impossible to cover the entire area in Motus stations because from a practical standpoint, it's difficult, but also funding-wise, it's near impossible. So we try to make transects with these stations to make invisible fences, if you will, to try to make it impossible for a tagged bird to fly through and not get detected somewhere.
So how is the progress on that here in Wisconsin so far?
Yeah, we have the majority of Lake Michigan covered. That includes the main water body and Green Bay. We're also looking to build out 2 east-west transects that run from Lake Michigan to the Mississippi River. So we're kind of in the process of installing stations, looking for partners along those lines, and then kind of working everything out to establish stations there.
So tagging birds with the Motus device can help us track a bird's migration pattern. How is this different from traditional tracking methods like bird banding?
So bird banding has been used for a really long time, probably hundreds of years. And the problem with bird banding is that it requires you to recapture the bird. So if we captured a bird right here and we put a band on it and sent it on its way, in order for you to tell where that bird was tagged, where it's been, it has to be recaptured again, which it does happen. It happens a lot because there's a lot of people that still ban birds. And I'm not saying that it's not important to ban birds and that you can't get anything from them, but with the Motus Wildlife Tracking System, you don't need to recapture that bird. As long as it flies within range of a station and that station detects it, you can see every single other station that bird has flown by. You know right away where it was tagged and other information that was collected when the bird was tagged. So you only need to capture it once in order to get potentially a lot of information.
So when you're banding a bird or you're tagging a bird with a Motus tag, do you need a purpose for it?
A project is required, whether or not you're banding birds or you're tagging birds. Special permissions are also needed. So, for example, say you're a bander, you can't just go out and say, oh, I'm going to put some Motus tags on some bluebirds today and some robins tomorrow. You have to have a really specific reason for applying the tags. You have to have a really specific project and really specific questions that you're looking to answer by tagging these birds. So it's pretty strict requirements, and along with that, the people applying the tags have to have special training. They have to really know what they're doing to apply these tags to the birds. I will say, though, that bird banding, putting a band on the leg of a bird, is required before any transmitter, whether it's Motus or GPS, is applied.
Okay, so walk me through the process of how tagging a bird with the Motus device works. Can you first describe what this tracking device looks like?
The size of the tag is probably about the size of a pencil eraser. The antenna is pretty long. People are often surprised by the length of the antenna. That can be, 4 to 6 inches in length. And so a lot of times that's hanging off the back of the bird, and sometimes people ask, is that bad for the bird? Generally, no. There are certain species where it's not great, and the antennas can be trimmed to a certain degree, but you have to really be careful when you start doing that, just because it can limit the range of detection. But kind of the process of tagging a bird, of course, you have to catch it. A lot of researchers use mist nets. They're almost invisible nets that are set up. They're long nets. And if you get your target bird, measurements are typically taken, wing cord length, weight, looking at body mass, and then a band is applied, and then a Motus transmitter is applied. Generally speaking, for Motus wildlife tracking, it's typically just a little figure-8 harness that goes around their legs and over their back, and it sits on their back like a little backpack. And then the bird is sent on its way, and hopefully it'll fly by stations so that we can see where the bird was and where it's going.
So I understand that the first Motus towers went up in Wisconsin around 2019. How have you noticed the program evolve over the past 6 years?
Yeah, right now we have about 24 in our network. In the state total, there are about 30 to 35 Motus stations that are found throughout Wisconsin. It's not willy-nilly how we put up stations. The theory was that the western edge of Lake Michigan, the eastern edge too, but since we're on the western side, the western edge is a migratory funnel for birds. And we don't necessarily know if that's the case. Of course, lots of birds do fly over every single year. But we wanted to establish those stations there because if it is a migratory funnel, we can see how tagged birds move along the lake. In a perfect world, there would be a station every 7 miles along Lake Michigan, along the Illinois-Wisconsin border, which there actually is, all along the Mississippi River, and then across the entire border of the UP. And then we'd have 2 other lines that cut east-west through Wisconsin.
So when you're looking to put up a new Motus tower, what factors go into deciding where you set up a station?
First of all, we're looking at proximity to other stations, and we're seeing if we can tie that station in with another part of a line that's already formed. That isn't necessarily a prerequisite, but it's a bonus if we can do that. We're also examining factors such as how open of an area is it. So we don't want to set up these stations where there's a lot of buildings nearby or dense trees nearby. You want to have a pretty good line of sight. So like the site that we're at now, you can see lots of sky in the distance. And of course, the station is on top of a roof. So up there, it for sure would have a very good line of sight. It's above all the trees, and that's an ideal situation. Another thing that we're going to be looking at that we haven't done as much is analyzing the interference or the noise levels that are within, because that can really impact the ability of the station to receive tag pulses. So that's another thing we're going to look at.
Is this data that is captured by the Motus towers, is that like publicly accessible?
For the most part, there are a handful of projects that have their data in private, but for the most part, you can go to motus.org and you can view a map of all the stations, and you can see how many birds were detected, and it'll show you the species. And you can click on that individual and see the track that it had taken, or all the stations that it had been detected by. You can also search for specific projects if you happen to know the project number or the name of the project that you're interested in, and you can see all the birds that were tagged under that project. So for the most part, everything is publicly available.
I'm Lake Effects expert Nunez speaking with Jacob Wolf about the Motus Wildlife Tracking System. It's one way to track bird migration. So we've discussed a lot about how this tracking system works. but I'm curious what researchers or the average birder can learn from the data that Motus collects.
So next year we're starting a purple martin tagging project. Purple martin is a species of special concern in Wisconsin. They solely rely on human-made houses to survive in this part of North America. They used to be primarily cavity nesters, but with the decline of cavities, dead trees, and so on, they've relied solely on these human-made nest boxes. So we're very curious as to the habits of these birds. We're looking at, site fidelity. That just means, is the individual staying at the site? How long are they staying at the site? Are they tied to it? Are they coming back year after year? They also have this interesting habit of forming very large roosting flocks prior to fall migration. And one is located up by Lake Poygan in the Lake Winnebago system. And we'd be interested in knowing, are birds that are tagged down here flying all the way up there, and how many birds in this general area are using this roost site. The roost site is important because it's relatively small and it's been used for a very long time. And so if something were to happen to this roost site, that would be very devastating potentially to the population. So using Motus technology, we can identify important areas that birds utilize, whether it's stopover sites, whether it's roosting sites, or important migration corridors to inform land managers and inform other people that could potentially impact in a good way these sites that birds need to use as they're migrating through.
Wow, that's really interesting. How long do you think that research project will go on for?
It's going to be a multiple year project. We're probably looking at tagging birds for sure next year and possibly the year after. And then depending on, the life of the bird, we're hoping to get data for multiple years following that as well. But a lot of factors can influence how much data we get. Bird could die from natural cause, or the tag could fall off, or the tag could malfunction. But it's going to be a multi-year project.
Well, what are some bird species that this Motus tower that we're looking at picked up over time?
It has detected several Swainson's thrushes. And the interesting thing about that is those birds were tagged near Vancouver. So that's a long ways away. But interestingly, in the fall, they seem to make these big dog-legging migratory patterns. So once they leave the breeding grounds, they'll kind of fly towards the Great Lakes. And once they hit the Great Lakes region, then they'll head straight south. We've also detected saw-whet owls, several species of warbler, shorebirds. This station here has detected approximately 40 different individuals. Some of the species are the same within those individuals, but there's been quite a few detections, and I believe it's our most productive station.
So just to reflect on everything we've talked about today, what do you hope our listeners take away from learning about this tracking method?
I think just how cool it actually is. Most people are familiar with bird banding, but a lot of people really aren't familiar with the Motus Wildlife Tracking System. And I don't think a lot of people know that a lot of really cool data is available to the general public. The Motus Wildlife Tracking System is an international collaborative research effort. So basically every station that goes online here is part of the large-scale project. So our goal was to establish as many stations as possible in as many priority areas as possible. Now we have a lot, and now we're kind of progressing towards a tagging project and hopefully helping purple martins in this case in their conservation needs.
Well, Jacob, we've reached the end of Chirp Chat, but before we wrap up, I love for guests to shine a spotlight on a bird for the month. So I'm wondering, what's a bird you'd like to highlight this month?
Has anyone done ruffed grouse?
No.
I really like ruffed grouse. I spend a lot of time up in northern Wisconsin, and they're kind of a chicken-like bird. They are primarily a ground species, so they'll forage and stuff on the ground, and they'll typically only fly when they go to roost or if they're frightened. They have a crest, and they're generally brown. Some of them have slightly different color morphs, where they're more reddish, some are more brown, some are a little bit more gray. But yeah, just a kind of a stocky, chicken-like bird that's smaller than a chicken. And the males do this very neat mating ritual known as drumming. It's a display used to attract females. They'll stand on a log and beat their wings, and it's a beat that starts off very slow and ends very fast. It's similar to like if you're pulling on the cord of a lawnmower, but then the drumming just all of a sudden stops. And so it's very unique. And looking at some of the research behind it, a lot of people believe that the log that they select is based on acoustics and how well the sound travels. But it's a very neat thing, and if you're ever in northern Wisconsin, you'll hear it all the time if you're up there in the spring.
Well, that's a really great bird. No one has ever mentioned it, so thank you for including that.
No problem.
Well, Jacob, thanks so much for telling me more about the Motus program. It was really great to learn more about this way we're studying the movement and behavior of birds.
Thanks for having me, and it's great talking about it, and hopefully people learned a little bit.
Jacob Wolf is the Motus coordinator at the Lake Michigan Bird Observatory. He spoke with Lake Effect's Excret Nunez for a monthly series we call Chirp Chat.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.